All right. So now we're going to talk about standards. As we all know, SQL is a language that's used to talk to databases. And a lot of different companies make databases, right? They supply databases. If you just think off the top of your head, there are many, many companies that have the software and the database infrastructure. Microsoft, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, just some of the names you might have heard of. And all of these different companies are supplying database software and databases, but they're all using SQL. So, if SQL is the language, how do we make sure that all of these companies know what version of SQL they need to make? Well, SQL is what's known as a standardized language. What do I mean by that? Each language has a set of rules. And SQL has standards. So there are a set of rules in place that need to be followed. Think of the gold standard. And a bunch of people will come together to talk about these standards and what should be next. That's what we call standardization. If a committee comes together, a bunch of people, and they start saying, okay, we need this and this and this, and they put together new rules year after year, then we're creating standards. Now, you may think like, okay, so if SQL is a language and a committee is coming together to put together these rules about how you're supposed to make SQL work for your database, why would companies follow this? Well, since SQL is a widely adopted language, right? Everyone knows how to use it. Everyone talks about it. It is good for companies to follow the standards because that means that you have consistency. Since everyone knows this one language, companies want people to use their software. So they will follow the standard and then they will add some extras just to make their product slightly more appealing than the other products. So this committee comes together. They put together some standards. The companies follow those standards and then they put some hot new shiny things on top of it to make their product more appealing. They put the latest and greatest in there. And they do this because they want a high adoption rate. What do I mean by that? They want all the people in the industry to use their software, their databases, as opposed to other people. That's why they will implement the standards and then add all of those knobs on top. And if we look at the history of the standards, we started all the way back in the 80s when the first version of SQL was released. They released a paper with all of the functionality that SQL should have and go forward to 89, 92, all the way up to 2011 and beyond. And we're still creating these standards and companies are still following these standards. But they go beyond the standard, like I said, because they want the latest and greatest for their software to get people to use their software. So if you look at, for instance, the SQL version in Postgres versus the SQL version that Microsoft would use or Oracle will use, there will be slight differences, but there will be a lot of things alike. And that's what makes SQL so attractive as a language. The fact that we can go in and say, hey, here's this one language we all know, and you can hit the ground running. And we have all of these extra things that this other vendor, Microsoft, Oracle, or whatnot, may not have. Great. So now we know all about the standards. We know all about SQL. We know about queries. We know that databases are structured sets of data. But there's so much more to uncover when we talk about databases. We know now that SQL is being used to talk to the database. We know that we're going to use queries to get the data. And we definitely know the history of SQL now and that there are standards. So before we get into all of the functionality around SQL, let's take a deeper look at the database and how it operates. What makes a database what it is? Let's just look at that under a microscope. See you in the next video.